Now Longford came down with his own cameraman, who was also well known in the industry, a man called Ernest Higgins. And between them, they got money shot after money shot. They got the arrival, for example, of the Model T Fords and the wagons that were coming from down at the Molonglo River. They all came up to approximately this area. They got the politicians who were chatting up here in front of us on the way to what is now the Parliament House, chatting enthusiastically. They got the arrival of Lady Denman and the beautiful flower girl who met her. They got stray dog after stray dog who were very much involved in the action. They got the arrival of Lord Denman, who came in the same direction from the Molonglo, coming up this way. He came up, he greeted all the celebrities just up here, and then of course between them, with the others, including Prime Minister Andrew Fisher, they were atop this podium. We had first the foundation stone ceremony, we had second the naming ceremony, we then had Lord Denman going down with Andrew Fisher for the march past down towards the river. Everyone was delighted with that. And then you had, just for the record, the telegraphists, all the reporters who were sending this news out to the world at, we are told, some 200 words a minute. Basically, Higgins and Longford got everything needed. Longford and Higgins didn't get any footage of the luncheon that followed the main events, or if they did, none of it has survived. But it doesn't really matter, because what we have for posterity is 19 superb minutes from early Federation Australia's equivalent of the American legends D.W. Griffiths and Cecil B. DeMille. Now Longford was between pictures, and Spencer's Pictures, who employed him, sent him down here. And this was the nation's great fortune. Stage performer, film star, film director, one half of the famed Longford-Lyell partnership, Raymond Hollis Longford has quite a story to tell. And to tell it, I've headed to one of Canberra's special places, one of its special buildings, the 1929-1930 Art Deco former Institute of Anatomy, the National Film and Sound Archive. Let's head on in. Quite appropriately, on the wall of the National Film and Sound Archive's gift shop, we've got a poster promoting Raymond Longford's classic of 1919, The Sentimental Bloke, the jewel in the crown of Australia's silent cinema. More of the bloke shortly. But we'll get our detailed information from the fine National Film and Sound Archive Library. It'll tell us everything we need to know about the man who caught Canberra's Foundation Stones naming ceremony on film for the nation forever. Raymond Longford was born in Melbourne in 1878. By his early 20s, he'd served in the Boer War in South Africa and also earned his third mate's ticket to sail the oceans of the world. But in the early years of Federation and the new Australian nation, he turned away from the sea and a failed marriage to begin a career in the theatre. Immediate stage success in the country towns of Australia and New Zealand soon led to silver screen offers. The lure of the relatively new cinematograph technology proved irresistible. Success in the new medium came so quickly that by the beginning of 1913, the year Canberra's foundation stones were laid, Longford had already starred in several important films of the infant Australian cinema, including two very popular bushranger features in 1911, Captain Starlight and Captain Midnight. Now this was a fascinating period for Australian film, as it became obvious that local audiences couldn't get enough bushranger flicks, probably starting with the legendary Ned Kelly film in 1906. The problem for the community moral guardians of the era was that virtually all the bushranger films being made were conspicuously pro-bushranger and, worse, anti-police. In 1911, the year of Longford's 2 forays into the genre as starring actor, New South Wales politicians were so disconcerted by the emergent social trend that they legislated to ban bushranger films entirely. The ban, however, had no impact on Longford's personal rising star. In fact, the decade from 1909 to 1919 was a landmark period for both Longford and Australian cinema. For it was in 1909 that Raymond Longford started working professionally with 19-year-old Lottie Edith Cox, 12 years his junior. Lottie Lyell, as she would become known, who would in time be recognised as the most significant female star in Australian film. It seems likely that Longford and Lyell became lovers when she was in her early 20s. They were, as one biographer has put it, husband and wife in everything but name, because Longford's estranged first wife, a devout Catholic, would not give him a divorce. Longford and Lyell became one of Australian culture's most potent and professionally productive relationships, but it was a relationship destined to be tragically cut short. Lottie died of TB in December 1925. When Longford died, well over 3 decades later, his second wife had him buried in the same grave as Lottie at the Northern Suburbs Cemetery in Sydney. Every year on Lottie's birthday, Marilyn Dooley, film historian and national treasure, places a single rose on the luminous plot. Longford's precious Canberra Foundation film of 1913 fits neatly within his career's most significant decade. Before 1913, he was best known as a talented actor, become good enough to be entrusted with lead roles in a burgeoning number of Spencer's pictures. But when a gap appeared in his busy schedule, Spencer's, keen to develop the directing skills of their stable star, pointed him south to the Monero region and the new capital. In the years following 1913, Longford's output as a director was prodigious. The Silence of Dean Maitland in 1914, A Maori Mermaid's Love in 1915, with Lottie playing the daughter of a Maori mother, and Mutiny on the Bounty in 1916, with Lottie playing the role of the compelling Nessie Hayward. Then came the banner years for the Longford-Lyell partnership, a creative team with even more impact on Australian cultural history than that of the Chicagoans Walter Burley Griffin and Marion Marnie Griffin. In 1918, the Longford-Lyell partnership, he behind the camera, she starring in front of it, produced The Woman Suffers. In 1919, The Sentimental Bloke, based on C.J. Dennis's verse classic of Australian literature. And in 1920, the film On Our Selection, based on the runaway bestseller by Steele Rudd. The Woman Suffers, lovingly recreated by Marilyn Dooley at the National Film and Sound Archive a few years ago from the footage that fortunately has survived, is grand and compelling melodrama. A young girl, wronged, suicides, whereupon her brother, bent on revenge on the seducer, in turn seduces the man's sister, played brilliantly by Lottie Lyell. The highly controversial and influential Woman Suffers, with its confronting expose of society's double standards and Longford's impressive exploration into cinematic realism, was a robust commercial success, providing the perfect financial springboard for the Longford-Lyell team to produce arguably the one true classic of the Australian silent screen, The Sentimental Bloke. The Bloke, as it is now affectionately known, starred Lottie as the heroine Doreen in a memorable portrayal, her best, and former labourer and vaudeville performer Arthur Toshert, handpicked by Longford after an exhausting number of screen tests to play Bill, the Bloke. the sentimental bloke. Filmed almost entirely in Sydney's grim working-class suburb of Woolloomooloo, the story progresses through a picaresque progression of comic scenes as Worker Bill eventually forgoes his passion for drinking and gambling for the love of the delightful Doreen, a pickle factory worker. While there is no doubt that C.J. Dennis's abundance of early Federation Australian slang does not comfortably make the leap into the 21st century, it is equally certain that the stunning cinematography, deft direction of characters, beautiful performances by the principal characters, and simple, elegant set locations continue to have enormous attraction for today's film buffs. In post-World War I Australia, exhausted, weary and grieving after massive losses, they were a revelation. Longford's increasingly sensitive hand with cinematic realism impacted on a whole community. Lottie's Doreen and most of her screen characters, self-effacing but proud, endearing, often daredevil and certainly outdoors types, embraced a bold concept of Australian womanhood that had been developing for well over 100 years. Together, Longford and Lyell were irresistible. As film biographer William Drew has written, in their films rich with humour and insightful observation, Longford and Lyell revealed to the world for the first time on screen the plucky, resourceful, democratic national character of the Australian. Longford and Lyell belong not only to Australian, but also to world cinema. So I want to make the claim that it was Canberra's and the nation's great fortune to have one Raymond Hollis Longford directing the shots behind the camera on the dusty limestone plains on the 12th of March 1913. I'm sure now that I'll be among believers. Longford's productive visit to the Monero Plains in March of 1913 produced one more bit of classic footage, heritage footage for the nation. What he did after he'd done the foundation stones and naming ceremony down below, he and Ernest Higgins came up to this spot, Mount Pleasant, what we now call Mount Pleasant Lookout, above Duntroon. They set up a stand just about where I'm standing. They got the camera above. They looked south to what we now call Manuka and Kingston, the suburbs of Manuka and Kingston, and they began a slow pan through Capitol Hill, Black Mountain, Mount Ainslie, all the way round to Duntroon and the airport. About a year before he died, in 1958, a full 40 years after the sentimental bloke, Raymond Longford was tracked down by Bob Sanders and an ABC TV crew. Sanders sat Longford down and he reminisced about the past. Today, it makes for very moving and poignant viewing. Who knows, perhaps in the build-up to the Centenary of Canberra, what we'll see is a revival in the fortunes of one Raymond Longford.
What have you been doing for the past 40 years, Mr. Longford? Are you still making films or what?
Oh, no, that's long thing of the past. When things got very, very bad with me, financial and otherwise, well, I resorted to the waterfront. After all said and done, as a young fellow, I'd been an apprentice in sail. Pretty tough in those days it was, believe me. Apprentice in sail, so, of course, it was the last refuge, I suppose, we put it that way. But I became a watchman on the waterfront.
And are you still doing that?
Yes, still at it.
And how old are you?
Night and day.
If you don't mind me asking.
My age is 85.
Oh, that's wonderful. You don't
Yeah.
find the work too strenuous?
Oh, not a bit. They're a fine lot of chaps, and reverting back again now to digressing a little bit back to the business, I would like to see it go ahead, particularly in Australia, in a very, very big degree, the making of pictures, such as television, as they speak about today, that I'm not familiar with. I would like to see it go ahead with leaps and bounds, and particularly the good Australian stories indigenous to Australia, full of sentiment. After all said and done, aren't we all sentimentalists? And as myself, well, I'm the sentimental bloke.